Jiao Wu Hao, Wu Jiao Sun Da Sheng. It's true, it's true. My wife gave me that name, and I now have to live up to it. My name is Simon Bevan from Grant Thornton, and this is not an advert, but having heard Mr. Wu speak, I thought I would just mention to you that just this week we're delighted to have been part of a publication of a book called The Thoughts of Chairman Now, which is based on extensive interviews with 14 business leaders in China, some state-owned and some entrepreneurial businesses. And it's a really insightful book of the sorts of things you were hearing about from Mr. Wu in terms of leading and building a Chinese business that is increasingly going international in some cases. I think those of you who are interested in that sort of thing might be very interested in that book, so I thought I'd mention it. I'm delighted that I'm joined here on the stage today by a very distinguished panel. I'm hoping each of them will have a microphone, and we'll be able to fairly slickly move through. I'm going to ask each of them briefly to introduce themselves, and then I'll lead the questioning, if I may, and then we'll have time for questions and answers from the floor before we finish. Susan.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Simon. Well, I came in a little earlier this afternoon and listened to some of our previous panelists' the discussion, and feel it's a very good time for me to be here to meet the people here, because I have been working in the investment banking business for over 20 years. I myself actually cannot believe it. So I used to work with Morgan Stanley, HSBC Investment Bank, and my current position is advisor to CICC, the company, and also I help the company to set up our London and New York and Singapore office. I just say I help the company to expand the business overseas. But now I just excuse myself from the senior position. Last year I took 1 year off to go to Cambridge and studied history. So now I become an advisor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shen Zhang. I'm with Shell. But whatever I say here represents my own views, doesn't necessarily represent the view of the company. I just want to make sure you understand that. I've been with Shell for 2 years. Today work out of London. I look after the global aviation business for the company. We operate in some 800 different airports, and every 12 seconds we fuel an aircraft. Before that, I worked 12 years in Shanghai, leading a regional operation for Capital Corporation. And prior to that, I was in Malaysia, US, and Canada. I was born in China, educated in China. So hopefully I can share with some experience about China with you.
My name is Hans Beck. I'm the co-founder and chairman of Torch Partners, an investment bank based here in London. We are advising clients on mergers and acquisitions and on capital markets transactions, particularly in the technology sector, but also in the resources and renewable sector. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Felix Zhang, and I'm actually alumni here from London Business School, and I graduated about 11 years ago. Time goes by really fast, and I can't believe I come back to see so many wonderful LBS students again. And I have actually been into many industries and lived in many countries. I have worked in the financial sectors, including Morgan Stanley, and work as a trader in Toronto in oil and gas sector, and work as a partner for a hedge fund after LBS for 7 years. And for the last 7 years, actually, I have co-founded and has been a CEO for Envision International, which is a clean tech company. And we actually have a very diverse clean tech technology focus, including energy storage, smart energy, digital energy solutions, and wind turbine technologies. And we do a lot of downstream projects as well. And currently, we have investments and offices in Mexico, Denmark, Sweden, Osaka, Japan, and also Houston, United States. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Grant. I'm a member of McKinsey & Company's global board. I led McKinsey & Company in Greater China for a number of years. and I currently reside in Singapore and lead all of our work for governments globally, including our work with the Chinese government.
Thank you all very much indeed. And just briefly, so I'm an accountant by background, and I spend a lot of time, increasingly these days, advising businesses in relation to China. I have a personal interest. I mentioned my wife is Chinese, and it's interesting. My personal journey is probably similar to many, and perhaps what we'll talk about today, which is initially my dealings with China were all through Hong Kong. I didn't even go to the mainland, I'm ashamed to say, until 2008, since which time I've been back many times. And initially my dealings were essentially with European businesses going into China, mainly for manufacturing initially, sourcing and so on. But increasingly that became China as a market. And then in recent years, despite the point made earlier that the volumes are still very heavily skewed in pound terms the other way, but increasingly it's money coming back the other way and people looking to do things coming from China into Europe. And we're going to talk about both those things this afternoon. So the first element of the questioning I'd like to cover really is about mergers and acquisitions. That's one of the models people use in order to open a new market. Rather than start there themselves, they'll buy something. And I'd like really to go around through the panel asking them each for some insights into M&A as a tactic for expansion overseas. And Andrew, if I could start with you.
Well, look, I mean, clearly M&A, you know, as students of business, that M&A has been, you know, a very powerful lever for the growth of businesses over the years. I think it's important to recognise when you do look at the studies that folk like McKinsey and others have done, about 2/3 of M&A is not successful. So when you look at the notion of expanding in China, given the pace that you must, you know, expand in China, and also some of the cultural challenges, M&A has proven to be a fairly difficult pathway. Likewise, the other way. So I mean, yes, there are a number of successful examples of using M&A, but I also think that it should be considered along with the other toolkit. The notion that if you're a company that needs to make up for lost time in China, more often than not, M&A proves to be the most expensive and highest risk to make up for lost time. One other observation in terms of the stats that have been shared today in terms of the somewhat unbalanced nature of M&A activity from China back into Europe. Just one observation that I would make, I think Europe needs, and look, I know Europe is I'm talking at a very general level, but I think many people in Europe utterly underestimate the degree to which others are in China today marketing to various Chinese enterprises and sources of capital in terms of the propositions that they have to offer. We often joke that the best way for McKinsey to meet its global clients is to hang around the cafeteria of some of the leading sovereign wealth funds in China, and everyone's going through the front door. Sadly, we don't see that many European companies doing that, and I think Europe needs to be a little more proactive in terms of the offerings to China, given the proactivity that the US, but also other parts of Asia, Australia, New Zealand, are really in there promoting themselves, providing offerings, providing clear pathways. I think Europe could do a better job on that front.
Felix, do you have a view on M&A?
Yeah, actually I have a lot of views on M&As, and just a different form of M&As. And given that our company is only 7 years old, and but we have actually growing quite a lot. I mean, we become one of the largest renewable company and globally. And our strategies have not been actually doing a lot of physical acquisitions in the overseas markets, and we've been focusing on acquisition of the talents internationally. And many of you probably don't know that in China we actually have a human resources department for the government, which we call that Organization Ministry of China. And Organization Ministry of China have this thousands of talents programs, which they will bring thousands of talents to China, and it doesn't matter what nationals you are. And you can be Chinese, overseas Chinese, you can be Americans, Europeans. And you know, if you look at in the clean tech space, it's actually a very global industry, and there's a lot of things. It's a relatively young industry, and many different countries have its own strengths and weakness. You know, we set up our global innovation center. I hired about 50 Danish and German engineers, and not far from Legoland. So if you've been, have you taken kids there? So you've probably been there, and And we very much, from people from there have a tremendous amount of, knowledge build-ups in wind power technologies. Now we set up a company in Houston, in Texas, and Houston have a lot of talents in the traditional energy space. So we hired a team from Halliburton, focus on cloud services in oil and gas services. We hired a team from IBM Energy Services, focusing on actually, in terms of digital solutions in the energy space. We also hired a team from some of the renewable power plants, and so they have a lot of knowledge in actually running the power plants. In Japan, we set up a company in Osaka, Japan. We hired a lot of Japanese and Koreans. And this company is focusing on energy storage. As you probably know, Japan have a lot of talents in energy storage space. So what I like to emphasize is there are many different ways for a company to grow. And in our side, we're actually focusing on acquire talents internationally and for our company.
And Hans, your business is very much around M&A, advising people. What can you tell us?
Yes, it is. I would like to probably talk a little bit about M&A activities of Chinese companies in Germany today, because I believe Germany is a very good example for a country where increasingly successful M&A transactions and acquisitions of German companies by Chinese companies are being executed. In 2011, Chinese investments in Germany became actually the largest inbound investments, surpassing the United States, which traditionally has been the largest investor in Germany. So why is that? I think, first of all, the industrial strengths of Germany is very complementary to the Chinese. Its manufacturing, and its manufacturing was a high technology degree in areas like automobile industry, car making, automobile components, aviation, machine tool, but also in renewable energy, chemical, medical technology, civil engineering, and last but not least also in fashion and appliance industries. So a lot of interest, one should assume, and indeed there is a lot of interest from Chinese companies in what's happening in Germany. There's another aspect, and that is that Germany is a industry with a horizontal structure. This goes back many, many years when the big German companies agreed that they should not focus on the whole value chain in manufacturing complex products like cars and aircraft, etc., but should try to forge relationships with small but nevertheless very focused companies that cover niche products for the use by these large manufacturing companies. Automobile industry is a prime example. Volkswagen and Daimler-Benz and Audi, they would have a myriad of small, mainly family-owned companies that supply them. And these companies, when Volkswagen starts an operation in China, these companies, small family-owned companies, are being told, if you want to remain a customer of Volkswagen, you better be where we are, and that is in China now. So these companies are being forced, basically, to establish operations in China. Some can do it, others do not have the capital base to do it. So that is another situation where these very focused but small companies which have a high international recognition for their products, often the world market leaders in these particular technologies, that these companies can be and should be, I'm pretty sure, the main targets for Japanese companies looking for respective technologies. And The situation started out a decade or maybe 15 years, 20 years ago when the first Chinese companies came to Germany and tried to acquire German companies. Often they were, or sometimes they were successful at that time. However, they suffered very quickly from a reputation at that time of buying technology, but then only for the purpose of repatriating these technologies to China. And what they left were factories that had no employment anymore and were empty. So that has, I'm happy to say, has changed quite significantly, and Chinese buyers and also German sellers have learned from these mistakes. And Chinese companies now understand much better the value of management know-how, the importance of R&D, which you cannot simply take and move in a suitcase or wherever to any other country outside Germany, but because it is R&D that is being done in very close cooperation between these companies and universities, and also a number of world-leading private and government R&D institutes. For example, the Fraunhofer Institute and the Max Planck Gesellschaft. And furthermore, there is a very, and Germany is very renowned for this, a very highly trained and educated and loyal workforce. Again, this is, we are talking about family-owned companies in relatively small areas of Germany. Germany is very decentralized. And these companies are second, third generation run by the same family. And the same is true for the employees. They also are often second, third generation. So they have, their fathers and grandfathers have worked in the same factory where they are working today. So this is hugely important for the success of German companies. So I think today more Chinese-owned companies expand in Germany. That means they are not repatriating technology and facilities. They keep the facilities in Germany. They expand the facilities in Germany. They also benefit from the Made in Germany certification, which has a very good reputation around the world. They have often international brand recognition of German products. And they have, on top of this, very easy access to the European, both Western European and Eastern European markets. And all that has changed this attitude of, I buy technology for the use in China, full stop. Now we are talking about Chinese companies wanting to buy companies in Germany, wanting to buy technology in Germany, but wanting to make the best out of it. Of course, they're using these technologies in China, in their own factories, but at the same time, they see that keeping these German brands running and going, they will be making much more profits in other markets as well.
Thank you, Hans. I'm going to widen the question slightly now as we move on to Sheng and Susan, and ask about, in addition to M&A as a strategy, alternative models, and then go around again briefly. So alternative models to M&A and M&A.
Let me just make a quick comment on the M&A first. I just want to sound a word of caution that you got to really know why do you want to do a merger and acquisition, right? Some of the companies think, oh, I want to be global. Well, why do you want to be global? Well, that's a trend. Well, are you in a trend business or fashion business? Are you really running a business? So be very careful understanding the objective, understand the synergy, understand what are you trying to get out of the M&A. And when I was in China, there are a lot of companies in the same industry, and a lot of people says, why don't you grow faster by acquiring these companies? And a lot of companies came to us and says, hey, I give you for free. Well, then you got to think about what I get. Even you get for free, you got a plant which might not be in good shape. You got some of the people probably not trained, and there might be some cultural issues. You got a site, maybe contaminated, might not fit for your expansion. So you need to be really careful when you do acquisition, merger acquisition. I think you just mentioned earlier, most merger acquisition were not successful. So it's a word of caution. Now, what other way to really extend your business beyond your home country border, frankly, there are just numerous ways. There are so many different ways. You got to, again, think about what are you trying to achieve. I think that's the most important thing. You can think about your developer market first, right? Get into the market. Now, if you just want to really know how to do business in that company, in that country, the market you want to get in, you might want to think about, okay, can I acquire a marketing company instead of a manufacturing company there, so I can really get low capital, speed, and get my product into that market. And then once you established in the market, it says, okay, do I really want to make in A place and then move all the way to B place, or should I really think about manufacturing there? And what's the competitiveness? Did you really understand your financial model before you actually move forward to start something different? So you can do market extension in that way. You can also think about technology cooperation. Some of the companies in China do not have the technology, the know-how, and you can work with. I think a lot of companies probably can work with you and doing certain things to help on the technology side, and could be a license agreement, and could be just a split of share of something in that way, or you can just hire the right people. Right? A lot of times, if you get right people into the organization, you probably can achieve some of the things that would be harder to achieve with the merger and acquisition. Quick comment on that.
And Susan.
Well, first I have to admit, as an experienced investment banker, M&A is not necessarily my favorite subject. Well, the reason for that is...
amongst friends here, Susan, you can admit it.
Yeah, well, I expect I sit here, people, they would like to hear me talking about M&A, but I would say M&A is very, very tough business. Very, very tough business, especially for the investment bankers side. Well, before I get into that part, I want to just have a brief review about the history of the Chinese M&A business development. In my experience, over the past 20 years, the first 10 years, we are helping the Chinese company to reorganize themselves, then to help them listed in the international market. So up to 10 years ago, a lot of Chinese company, once they have really built up their footholds in the domestic market and international capital market, they are looking for the cross-border M&A opportunities. And at that time, a lot of foreign companies also, kind of gain the trust, the confidence to get into the M&A business in China, just like what people have been talking about. Still a lot of opportunities to have for the foreign company to expand to China. They encounter different kind of difficulties and have to deal with local policies and the partnership and other kind of local issues. But that will become the ongoing concerns. But about 5 years ago, the Chinese company turned out to be the active participants in the international M&A markets. So this is just for Chinese companies to go overseas. That word has become 走出去, go out. It's really became a fashion only about maybe 8 years ago. Before, never heard of that. We always think have a Chinese open company. We are just, we should open the door. Open door means we welcome everybody come to my home, whatever you want to do. But then at 8 years ago, the Chinese companies start work out. Just say just 5 years. 5 years is just the start from 2007 to 2008, when the financial crisis hit the Western world. That a lot of Chinese at that time believe that it's like God bring the Chinese this opportunity, the unique opportunity to go out to, like what I heard this afternoon, one of the speakers mentioned that Professor Peter Nolan's book, that China buying out the world. Even the Chinese believe that they have the money, they have the desire, they have the inspiration to go out, buying out the whole world. 5 years later, we're sitting here, I would say none of these things really become real, and Chinese are not ready to buy out the world. Not even buy out the world, I still think we are encountered some difficulties to go out.
We're going to move to questions in 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you to give me one of the big challenges for a business that's either going into China from Europe or a European business coming into, a Chinese business coming into Europe, either direction. One big challenge and how to overcome it. Each of you could spend about a minute on that.
Look, I'd say in terms of the challenge going into China, I would still say the challenge is a positive and a negative challenge. When I first moved to China, we used to have a presentation, this was in 2002, that we'd give to clients. And literally it sort of started with the notion that if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough in terms of taking on China. And I can remember certainly a number of German companies and others literally being marched out of the room by the chief executive, the chairman, saying, you're certifiable. The notion that you could have an aspiration that large is just, you're not old enough to have an opinion, that's silly, it's stupid. When I look back at some of those aspirations that we put on the table that literally executive senior teams thought were laughable, today when we look back, they're laughable that they were too small. I mean, Volkswagen sold 65 billion euros of product last year. Apple sold 40 billion US dollars. So I think that there is still a challenge when you go into China. And yes, growth rates are moderating in percentage terms, but again, when I moved to China in 2002, China was only just becoming Italy. Next year, China will add Italy. So I still think there is a challenge for that just being able to get the scale right when you're building a business in China. It is the pace, what it takes to be relevant. I still think that that's an enormous challenge. I mean, even when you look at a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble needing to hire 10,000 people a year just to keep up, enormous challenge. In terms of the challenges, by the way, I'd also say that the risks, in many respects, we thought the growth would moderate. We also thought the risks would at some level moderate. I think the risks and the challenges of doing business have stayed large. So for me, China remains an enormous opportunity market, but you also, commensurate with that, need to invest in often building new to the world capabilities and skills to manage some of the risks, the reputational risks and the other risks that are as acute in China today as they were a decade ago. For Chinese companies going abroad, I still think it's just given the challenge they have to grow in China and to remain relevant in China, just having and you talked again around the importance of just the personnel challenge, having enough senior leaders that can operate outside of Chinese borders remains, in my view, the greatest challenge for the government, for all concerned. And interestingly, just to end with, in terms of these other forms of interesting partnerships, some of the most interesting form of partnerships we're finding are actually around human capital. I mean, even for McKinsey, our most successful apprenticeship development program is bringing Chinese talent to Germany, where we bring 100 folk a year and apprentice them in Germany, given the nature of the clients and their aspirations in China. So I would say, again, looking around partnerships and joint ventures that are very much more focused on the human capital side of the equation also offers a lot of opportunity.
Felix, do you have one big challenge?
Yeah. Well, given the limitation of time, I just put one point. I mean, I think it's, if you look at, I mean, as mentioned to some of the people earlier, you know, Fortune 500 companies, and this year 100 of them are Chinese companies, and but unfortunately 95 of them are SOE companies. There's only 5 private companies. And I think real challenges is not about, you know, outbound, inbound. It is really what's the objective of the Chinese corporations. It is really actually how we actually, now there's a bottleneck, and how we get to the next level. And it is very important, you know, we focus on innovations, and it is very, very, very important focus on branding of your product and services. We cannot go from the low end to the high end. It doesn't work. It has to focus on you creating values and positions yourself strategically from the high end and go conquer the world.
Hans, if you could just quickly wrap up. We've got about a minute to questions.
Just one point from a pure M&A execution point of view. What we very often still notice is that that many Chinese executives are not really accustomed with the structured M&A deals and transactions, and therefore, because they need much more time, they are not used to the European and US style auction processes. They often lose out, although they are very interested and probably, given having more time, would have been successful in acquiring businesses. But let me just add one sentence. I'm very encouraged looking into the audience today, because I'm sure this will be a temporary situation. I'm sure that when you all have graduated here, you will be very, very well accustomed to European ways of doing business.
Sheng, do you want to give one word?
Well, just very quick comment on the challenge. I think the number one, I second what you just mentioned, Andrew, is the human resources, talents. Let me just give you one number for you to think about it, particularly in China. Every year, there are something 110, 120 billion dollars of foreign direct investment, just foreign direct investment. Per week, it's more than $2 billion of foreign direct investment. Just imagine in your mind, how many experienced leaders does the country need every single week to manage that more than $2 billion of foreign direct investment, not even counting on the continuation of the business need to manage, not counting on the government and the private sector of the investment. So you all got a lot of experience here. I think I understand a lot of people got educated here, a lot of Chinese. But if you go there, I think there are a lot more opportunity than you can find here, in my opinion.
And Susan.
I think they have covered many of the important factors, but I want just to add one more angle. The difficulties for cross-border M&A, I mean, also the just domestic M&A, the same thing, is how to achieve the return on capital as you originally imagined or planned. That's very, very difficult. All the different kind of difficulties that just that you mentioned, ultimately, this reflected what you have achieved as a return. If you cannot achieve the return, you probably build up a very good partnership. You have an ongoing struggle. But the investment is considered, perceived by the market as a failure. The reason why I'm saying that is I have seen after the 2008, so many Chinese companies come to London through our office, not really targeted buying any assets in Europe or in London, because at that time they believe the Western world is really in trouble. They will not really provide anything in terms of return, the sense of return, which could match Chinese high growth rate, a high return rate. So they basically came to London, used this international financial center as a hub to go through Africa, Middle East, or go to some other South America to chasing the high return investment opportunity, which actually should be risk-weighted returns. It's turned out you chase the high return, but because the risk, Chinese may not get anything back. And the changes over the past few years is that a lot of Chinese come to London. They're really focused on buying the assets in Europe or in UK, especially from this year. They are not really go through London, but they are more interested in this place. But still, I think the return is still a challenge. A couple of years ago, when the CIC bought this Thames Water, the return is just about 5 to 8%. So now, last Monday, I received a client, potential client in my office, and she just sitting there talking to me about her interest, her company interest. She has ready money to invest it in like 30 different industries. And I said, could you just give me the top 3? And to her, she said, there's no difference. I'm really looking for returns.
That resonates with me so much. Quick time for questions. Can you have a couple of questions that we can take together? Yes, please, one here. and one over there. Just while the microphones are finding them, while the microphones are finding their way to you, let me just tell you one quick story. I was with a lawyer yesterday who runs one of the most successful city law firms, and I mean successful in the UK, but successful in China too, doing very well. And for them, the big barrier, the big challenge, they just cannot get enough people in China. They're having to pay them much, much more each year and each month than they were the month before. And if they had twice the number of people, they still couldn't fulfill all the demand. So it's a real challenge. Have we got microphones already yet, please? If you could get them to the people who are ready to ask questions.
Thank you. Just having a question to Phoenix. You mentioned about the sort of the state-owned enterprise nowadays is in the past few years sort of taking over the private enterprise, and they are now sort of the company be able to do the sort of foreign investment into Europe or other overseas countries. And do you think, looking particularly as those SOEs, do you think what is the challenge for them? Or also back to Andrew's point that regarding to sort of the human resource and capability, do you think that those sort of SOE leaders be able to capable managing their acquisition overseas?
Well, we work with a lot of SOE companies, from China National Grid to Datang and all these companies. And the management, senior management over there is very, very capable. And we are the first company brought Longyuan Group, which is Guodian, which is the largest, second largest utility company in the world, and to Canada, actually developed a 100 megawatts project in Canada. I think there are a lot of difficulties for SOE companies because there's alignment of interest, there's knowledge of the local markets, and there's another thing we talked about earlier is the human resources management. It is very difficult. I know for a fact, there's one friend of mine from GIC want to join CIC, and he spent 2 years, he can't join as a Singaporean. And so for state-owned companies to manage international talents, attract international talents, and integrate those international talents, I think is actually become very difficult. And so I think there is some shortcomings of state-owned companies in the international markets, but they definitely have a lot of strengths as well because they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of networking capabilities, and also potentially there's a Chinese market behind them. And but actually from what I look at, and mostly as a private company, I think it is actually much more important for private company going forward is focus on the branding, focus on bringing the international talents and managing the international talents, and really become a true international company based in China, but managing international business.
I'm going to take the next question from the back. I think the microphone's there.
Hello. Hi, I'm Tianan from London Business School. And thank you all for this very informative discussion. I have a question about the M&A deals undergoing in China. And from the discussion, it seems like now you have a very optimistic point of view with all the cross-border M&A going from China to Europe and the rest of the world. But do you think there is a certain point of time in the future, or do you think there is an indicator that might mark the maturity of China companies to be capable of or ready to buy out firms out of China?
Andrew?
I didn't want to present an overly pessimistic view. I actually think there are some really exciting areas. And the most exciting area I'm seeing at the moment is on two fronts. Number one is some areas that are of absolute fundamental need to the Chinese economy. So, for example, providing the right volumes of safe, high-quality food. Clearly an imperative for China at the moment. We are finding a number of large Chinese enterprises, both the sovereign wealth funds, some of the SOEs, but also some private companies, joint venturing to basically build dedicated to China food supply chains, which involves buying farms, involves building infrastructure, and involves some cross-pollination and joint venture M&A. But the unit of negotiation is more about delivering an integrated strategy around an imperative in the 12th and to be about 13th, 5th year plan, as opposed to just individual M&A. So I think that that's a very encouraging avenue, and there's quite a bit underway at the moment. Number two is actually seeing some large multinationals and large Chinese firms actually getting together to take on another market. So for example, without mentioning names, some of the large European and US industrials joint venturing with the likes of the State Grids, the Shanghai Electrics, etc., to actually build an integrated product portfolio in South America, in Africa, or even looking at things like how do they refit the grid in the US, given some of the infrastructure challenges there. So that's actually where I'm much more optimistic around the opportunities for cross-border M&A. But it's in the context of, to some extent, a broader strategic play that often has a very powerful need and imperative around meeting some of the objectives of the 12th five-year plan moving into the 13th.
I'm afraid we have run out of time. I'm conscious that we've already ticked past 20 to 4. So could I ask you please to thank the panel?